Alan Dershowitz, who is able to join us now. Professor Dershowitz, great to see you.
Thank you.
Let's start. I want to start actually before we get to Peter Navarro and talk about the fact that Democrats and Nancy Pelosi, they've hired this TV news producer to run this primetime hearing. You know, it seems like they're trying to take a page maybe out of Donald Trump's playbook here or something. I mean, this panel already has a perception of being highly partisan and opportunistic. I don't think this helps much. What do you think?
I don't. I think the panel itself violates the rules of Congress, which require kind of bipartisan, proportional balance between the members. And here you have all Democrats plus, I think, 2 anti-Trump Republicans. You're not going to get a kind of both sides of the issue presented. And I do think hiring and bringing on a media person really proves what the purpose of this thing is. It has nothing to do with law, justice, or the Constitution. It has everything to do with partisan advantage.
This is one of the things I think you warned us about a long time ago, is that once you start this cycle, it's never ending. And it's not about the rule of law or justice. It's just one side constantly trying to outdo the other side. And the American people are left to wonder, you know, should we put any faith and confidence into these folks? Professor, are you still with us?
To Navarro for a second. You know what they did to Navarro, they could easily do to me. I could be called. Are you hearing me?
I got you now, Professor. Yes.
Okay. What they did to Navarro, they could easily do to me. They could subpoena me to disclose all the conversations I had with President Trump when I was defending the Constitution on his behalf in the Senate. And I, of course, would refuse to comply with a legislative subpoena asking me to disclose lawyer-client information, just as a rabbi or a priest would or a psychiatrist would if they asked to disclose confidential information. I would require them to go to court first. We would hear both sides of the issue in front of a judge. And then if there was an order for me to disclose the information, I would do so. And that's all Navarro is basically saying. Get a court order, but don't compel me to disclose what I believe are executive privileged material without a court order. He's 100% right. And I think that the indictment should and will be dismissed.
And what do you think? I mean, placed in leg shackles and handcuffed, and they made a big deal about putting him in John Hinckley's cell.
That's just ridiculous. I mean, that's just overkill. And again, it shows the partisan nature, the weaponization of the criminal justice system in the normal course of events. You know, I've done this for 50, 60 years now. In the normal course of events, if somebody like that is going to be arrested, they send a letter to his lawyer and they ask him to appear in court. And he appears in a dignified way and he's immediately given bail. But you don't arrest him as he's getting on an airplane and put him in shackles. That's just showtime. Look, it didn't start here. Rudy Giuliani used to do that when he was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. So both Republicans and Democrats have used the criminal justice system as showcases, and it's wrong in either event. And he should never have been shackled or handcuffed. He just should have been given a summons to appear in court, and he would have appeared in court, of course.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this before. Eric Holder, the former attorney general under Obama, he was held in contempt of Congress, but nobody went to his house and shackled him and hauled him off to jail.
Yeah, and of course, in the end, nothing happened to him. You know, when you invoke the president's privilege, and that's what it is, his constitutional privilege, Congress violates the separation of powers when it orders the arrest or indictment of somebody without the intervention of the judiciary. That's what our Constitution is all about. It gives the judiciary the power to resolve disputes between Congress and the executive. And then the other absurd thing is the claim that the current president, who I voted for and support, that the current president can somehow waive the past president's executive privilege. It is so absurd. If a student ever wrote that on an exam, I'd ask them to consider whether they're in the right profession. And yet this is what is going on now.
Let's be honest, Professor Dershowitz, I think we could all, use a refresher course on things like separation of powers and basic responsibilities of the separate branches of government. Let's be honest. I mean, really, when you think about this stuff, you see how the judiciary has been used in this case. Yes, the judiciary should be separate from the legislative branch. Everyone, I think, can agree with that.
And Jamie Raskin, who's on the committee, who's on the committee, was my student. He heard me talk about the separation of powers, and he understands. You can wrap his knuckles, rhetorically speaking, of course, with the ruler. But we're joking. But you make a great point there. I do want to ask you. We got a couple minutes left here. I want to get to the Supreme Court. We were all waiting, maybe expecting some of those decisions to come down today. Massive decisions coming on that could impact Roe v. Wade. Also, this case in New York that has a lot to do with the Second Amendment. Any feeling from you on what's going to happen here? Oh, yeah. I think that Roe versus Wade either will be overruled or maybe the Chief Justice will be able to persuade Kavanaugh to just limit his decision, as they should, to the facts of this case, which is whether or not a statute that prevents abortion after 15 weeks is constitutional. But I think the Supreme Court may very well overreach, and decide to overrule Roe versus Wade, which they don't have to do to decide this case. Gun control is a little harder because it's a more nuanced issue, and I suspect the court will generally uphold gun rights, but perhaps with some nuances that won't satisfy either side.
Anything, obviously the right to bear arms is in the Constitution, the right to an abortion is not, and that's what a lot of people, they say, that's the big difference between these two cases.
Well, but the right of an abortion grows out of the right of privacy. And the Fourth Amendment talks about the right of the people to be secure in their persons. And then the 10th Amendment says that you don't have to specify rights. Any rights not enumerated can still be applied by the court. Obviously, there is a difference. There is a right to bear arms limited by well-regulated militia. And abortion is a right that was recognized only later. But let's remember also that the Second Amendment only recently was construed to contain an individual right. For the first couple of hundred years of our experience, it was defined as a right of the state militia to bear arms and have guns. So both require some interpretation of the Constitution, and I don't think anybody would doubt that it's the composition and makeup of the court that decides which rights are vindicated and which are not. If this were 10 years ago, we'd probably see the exact opposite results. And I think that makes a lot of people lose faith in the objectivity of the Supreme Court.
Speaking of the composition of the court, when it comes to Roe v. Wade, a lot of people pointing out there were all men on the court when that came down. Different makeup of the court right now. We'll leave it there. Professor Dershowitz, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you.